Hagava neged Rishoim hi meshubachas meod. There's another form of arrogance which is also positive. Not only the types of things he was saying before about being prideful in one's Judaism, in one's Torah study, in one's Torah observance, but also a person should be prideful regarding confronting the wicked. Lahochicham ulahachlimam ulachli moisam, whether it's to rebuke them or even to embarrass them if necessary in order to put them down and subdue them. V'lo yikan elehem, and he should not back down from them. Now the truth is, this is all really relevant because there's a Gemara in Brachos which talks about whether a person should take on the Rishoim or whether he should not take on the Rishoim. Some sources and verses seem to indicate that a person should take on the Rishoim, while others say no. The Gemara seems to reconcile the contradiction by saying, a person who's a tzaddik gamur, he's completely righteous, so he can have confidence to take on the Rishoim and overcome them. But a person who's not completely righteous cannot assume that he's going to be able to overcome the wicked, because he himself is not entirely righteous. So there might be some point in which he becomes ensnared. And therefore, not every person at every time should take on the Rishoim. But when it would be relevant, I suppose, a person should, or if a person has a doubt, maybe he should have his Jewish pride, his pride in his belief of God and the observance of the mitzvahs be enough to tip in the scales of taking on these wicked people, confronting them. And he should command people what's good and reprimand them, caution them, warn them against what's doing bad according to his ability. Even though this appears in the eyes of the world, like somebody who's trying to lord over others, minister over others, and be prideful. Since his heart is intending l'shem shamayim, so that is praiseworthy. He should not back down, he should not give in to the Rishoim. Kamo Mordechai shelo nichna lo Haman, like Mordechai who himself didn't bow down to Haman. Mordechai refused. Mordechai lo kara v'lo yishtachaveh. Lo yichra v'lo yishtachaveh. He was a tzaddik gamur, so he could take on a Rasha gamur like Haman. It's very interesting. Of course, Haman was a descendant of Esav. And when Yaakov, with his wives and their children, were returning back into the land of Israel, and they were confronted by Esav, we find that Yaakov and his wives and their children all bowed down before Esav. First, Yaakov presented his secondary wives, Zilpah and Bilhah, with their children, and the maidservants and their children all bowed down to pay homage and show respect to Esav. And then he presented Leah and her children, who also bowed down before Esav. We find that Yosef actually went in front of his mother and tried to intervene between Esav and Rachel so that Esav should not gaze upon Rachel, her beauty and her righteousness. He tried to, but ultimately they also both bowed down in front of Esav. There's only one person in that whole scene that did not bow down to Esav. No, Binyamin. Why is that? Because Rachel, even though she was pregnant with Binyamin, he had not been born yet, so he himself did not actually bow down in front of Esav. So the fact that Binyamin never bowed down to Esav created a spiritual legacy for his descendants that they should have a special fortitude and not bow down before the descendants of Esav. And since Mordechai was a descendant of the tribe of Binyamin, like it says, Ish Yemini, he was from the tribe of Benjamin, so it says regarding Mordechai, Lo yichra v'lo yishtachaveh. Right? It doesn't say he didn't bow down, but he will not bow down. Meaning Mordechai is of the tribe of Binyamin, who never bowed down to Esav and therefore will never bow down or kowtow to Esav. So we find then an example of this. Mordechai he didn't subdue himself, subjugate himself before Haman. Ubechol makom sheyesh mitzvah, any place where there's a mitzvah, alav la'asos, he should do it. V'lo yikana klal l'reshoyim la'azoi v'toiv b'pnei hashpalasoi lifnehem, and he should not refrain from doing this good act because the reshoyim are ridiculing him. Rather, he should brazenly do the mitzvah for them and not pay any attention to their ridicule and their scorn. Oh, you're wearing those ridiculous strings from your clothing? Come on. Be normal. Be modern. What's all this business? You think God really cares whether you have strings or you don't have strings? It's a bunch of mishigas. Everybody has to know. And more than that, you're being arrogant. Strutting around, showing off these tzitzis in front of everybody. Who needs that? The non-Jews have to see the tzitzit. You have to make a whole production out of it, a whole show out of it. These are the things that person hears from his friends, sometimes his family, and so on and so on. Ridicule and scorn. These are the opportunities where a person has to be arrogant. No, I'm proud to be a Jew. I'm proud to do the mitzvahs. I'm not embarrassed. I'm not shy. I'm doing it not to get attention, but do it because that's what Hashem wants, to connect to Hashem. Therefore, I don't care what people think. I don't care what people say. If a person can come to physical harm because of the tzitzis, he's allowed to tuck them in. They don't have to be visible in all scenarios. We're not talking about that. We're talking about where it's just a case of ridicule or scorn or mockery. But it does require some discerning when a person should actually do this or not. Sometimes it's actually not worth it to stand up against them. If he is brazen against them regarding one mitzvah, so he might actually cause them to lose 100 mitzvahs. I think what he's referring to is talking to Jews. Let's say the Jews are ridiculing him regarding a mitzvah, and he makes a fight over it, makes a big argument. He might actually turn them off so that they themselves don't perform any more mitzvahs. So it might be better to back down on one mitzvah if it'll at least enable them to continue doing others. Therefore, the wise man has to weigh very seriously according to the time and the circumstance. There are certain things that a person has to let go. Lose the battle to win the war. Other things that he should not let them go by under any circumstances. He has to literally stand with his body poised against them, between them, or between them, these particularly wicked Jewish people who want to do certain things which are extremely forbidden. He has to stand in their way. And he should not give in. All of this is regarding Devar Mitzvah, some mitzvah involved, or an Avera, meaning to have them do a mitzvah, or prevent them from doing an Avera. But regarding things like merchandise, business dealings, and so forth, he should give in. And be lenient, be flexible in all cases. That's a big mitzvah. Interesting. So when it comes to mitzvah observance or the prevention of doing averos, a person has to be, in most cases, ready to fight and be ferocious like a lion. That's not a time for humility. Who am I to stand up against them? Who am I to say anything in this situation? No. You have to muster up strength and rebuke or instruct or prevent. However, it has to do with monetary, financial things, and there's a bickering or a dispute, or you feel like somebody's wronging you, or so forth and so on. What he's saying here is, you should generally kind of relinquish, give way. I'm sure this needs qualification, because in the end of the day, there is such a thing as based in, and if a person's wronged you, he's stolen from you, he's misled you, or so forth and so on, you're allowed to take the person to based in. So either he's saying, it's true, you're allowed to, but you shouldn't, Or perhaps he's saying there are certain scenarios where you would be allowed or even encouraged to go to Beis Din, and other things where you should let it go. What the difference would be, I don't know. Maybe it's something which is large or small, right? Significant or petty. Maybe that would be the difference. I don't know. A person who has arrogance, he has to make every effort to return from that attribute, meaning to do tshuva on it. Kihi meguna me'od, because arrogance is a very despicable trait. V'hezek shela rav v'mitzui tamid. Its harm is great and always present. V'toelet sheyesh ba, and the advantage, any possible advantage of pride is very small. Therefore, a person has to distance himself from pride and arrogance very much. Because in the end of the day, gaiva will cause a person to be broken. As he said earlier, God says, there's not enough room in the world for me and him. So who's going to be evacuated? The person or God? Clearly the person. Lifnei shever gaon. Before a fall, there's elevation. This verse is commonly used to refer to the wicked, that before God's kind of punishing them, he rises them to some state of high state of power or influence. The Gemara says, based on a verse in Eicha, I think, V'tzarea Rosh, that those who afflict Israel are made by God to be put on high. Why? Because when God brings his hand down upon them, he wants them to fall from a high place, number one. And number two, that if somebody's going to do something against the Jewish people, at least that person should be someone who's respectable, someone who's powerful. So it makes sense why he would take the Jewish people on. But a lowly person who's not worth anything and insignificant, that would be an insult. So God says, if a person is going to put himself against Israel, he elevates them at least, so that it seems that this person is in a position to argue with the people of God. And ultimately, when God brings his hand of justice down upon them, right, they go a long way down. But here, he's saying another thing, which is, if a person finds that he's taken a downfall, he's down for the count, it could very well be that he was acting in an arrogant way beforehand. Something happens, all of a sudden, boom, a person's life changes, and where until recently he was on top, all of a sudden he's on bottom. So that might very well be because when he was on top, he was arrogant about being on top. So the verse says, Lifnei shever gaon. V'ne'emar, Gavas Odom tashpilenu, that the haughtiness of a person will actually lower him. Elevating oneself is actually setting the stage for the fall. Ukfar yodato ma'ero leparoi ba'omroi mi Hashem, and it's already well known what was the result of Pharaoh's asking Moshe, meaning rhetorically, who is God that I should listen to his voice? That's what Pharaoh, the audacious Pharaoh, was saying. Who is God? I should listen to him. And what happened? What happened. Ule Goliath aplishti, the same thing regarding Goliath. He praised himself in his physical prowess, and ultimately he was lowered by a stone, by a lad. Shomar ani cherafti es ma'archois Israel. Goliath said, I spewed forth abuse against the hosts of Israel, which is understood to be referring to God. And the same thing regarding Sennacherib in English, or Sancheriv, who said, Mi b'chol Elohei ha'aratzois asher hitzilu es arzo miyadi. Who is it among all of the nations who saved those countries from my hand? Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, the mightiest, wealthiest empire of his times, made this very arrogant statement. Who is protected, who is guarded, who has saved or redeemed the nations from my hand? I control everything. What happened? He took a fall. Yes, down for the count, and then he bit the dust. The famous story about how in his siege of Jerusalem, all of the armed warriors that were encamped around the city were miraculously killed overnight by the angel of death in their midst, and anybody who was remaining fled back to Syria. Nebuchadnezzar, the same thing with Nebuchadnezzar, who was the ruler of Babylon, said something similar. Ba'amro, the end of the last line on page Yutes. Ullman hu elah Yeshezivinichon min yodai. Who's the God that can save you from my hand? Not even God can save you, the Jewish people, from me. V'hadol meilehen, and other such instances, asher amru kidivrehem, other leaders who said things similar to this. V'charisam haya buz v'kolon. Their final end was that of embarrassment and kolon. Umishahu b'midazo, a person who is in this attribute of arrogance, einu nitzol michet v'avon. He cannot be saved and spared from transgression and sin. As it was said by the wise man, who is that? King Solomon. Zed yohir let shemo ose be'evras zodoin. Zed yohir, I suppose Zed is like mazid. Accountable is the one who is yohir, is prideful. Let shemo, his name is like a fool, like a scoffer. Ose be'evras zodon. He does things with a spirit of transgression, of rebellious transgression. And since we've been speaking about arrogance until now, Shema divrei chachamim, listen to the words of the wise. Hochem echad omar, a certain wise man said, Miu asher lo tibored mimeno hadaga. Who is he who will not be separated from worry? Zeh mevakesh lalois malo shehi ma'alo mimeno. This is somebody who seeks to gain something which is above him. He'll constantly be perturbed by this. And furthermore it says, somebody who considers himself to be full of understanding, people actually consider himself to be a fool. There are such people, right? They want to present themselves as if they know everything about everything. Most often, these people don't know very much about most things. And that's why they're so verbal and verbose about the things that they know. Because they're trying to cover up for how much they really don't know. In fact, somebody once told me, I remember, speak up, kid. Talk a bit. Because otherwise people think you're stupid. You got nothing to say. Because I wasn't particularly talkative. And even now, I'm not talkative. I mean, it's true that I give classes, I read and I speak about Torah, but personally, socially, I'm not a very talkative person. But this person said to me, speak up, talk, make yourself heard. People think you don't have anything to say, you got nothing upstairs. I don't think that was the case, but it struck me as odd. Why would you say something if you don't have anything to say? Just for the sake of talking, so people think you're smart. And you look around and you see plenty of people talk. They talk gibberish, nonsense. So that according to our sources, right, somebody who talks is not necessarily somebody who's smart. On the contrary, somebody who talks is often somebody who's just got...
Empty barrels make the most noise.
Yeah, very nice. Empty barrels just making a bunch of noise. Boom, boom, boom. So, this is another teaching of our sages regarding arrogance. And they also said, pertaining or in proximity to Gava, ma'alalim ra'im, there are many bad habits and traits and plots. Umi sheyeshbo ma'alalim ra'im, somebody who's got these evil plots in his head because of his pride, so he's going to be hated by other people because he's constantly conniving and making machinations against other people, and so forth and so on. But nefashos notos ma'alav, and other people are going to be kind of repelled by this person. Who needs him? He's not pleasant. He's always conniving and thinking and calculating and so forth and so on. It was said by one wise man, Kasher ni'imus hatzura or haguf kach ni'imus hamidos or nefesh. Just like ni'imus hatzura, a pleasant form, is like light for the body, right? A pleasant, an attractive physique calls attention, is the glow, is the appeal of the body. Kach ni'imus hamidos or nefesh. So the pleasantness of one's character traits, that is the light of one's soul. V'amar, and he said further, Eina chashivus b'nefesh shehiyeh hamelech mizgoeh. It doesn't befit the royalty and, let's say, the lineage of a king to be arrogant. The king is by definition in a position of power, and therefore it's actually ugly that the king should abuse this position of power and assert it in an arrogant, prideful manner. Rather, a true king, one who has the true heredity to be a king, will not be arrogant. They will bear that royalty with subtlety and with grace. And just as that's the case regarding a king over his subjects, meaning a truly worthy person will not have to rule his subjects with power and force. Through the elevated stature of his degree of royalty, he'll inspire awe and subjugation in his subjects. So too, kol sheken b'nei adam mecherim ze'el ze'el, the more so when other people try and lord themselves over others. That shows that they are not really of strong character, and therefore they're trying to make up for their weak characters by asserting strength and power over others. But a person who's really got a strong character will not have a need to impose that strength over others. At most, he'll command that right? He'll command that subjugation naturally. There was a king who was sitting on his throne. In front of them there were chairs, elevated, one above the other. The king said to them, how is it that you kind of asserted a hierarchy so that some are sitting above others without my permission? And the one who was sitting in the highest level of the chairs, he responded, the purity of my pedigree positioned me above my peers. The second one said, I elevated myself above those below me because of my wisdom. The third one claimed, Shiflus nafshi v'tachos libi hoshivuni tachtehem. The lowly nature of my soul and the humbleness of my heart caused me to place myself below them. V'ha'alehu hamelech v'gidlo. And of the three, who did the king choose to elevate above the others? The third one, who said, I'm where I am because I put myself below the others. The one asserted his pedigree. The other is wisdom. The third said, I am where I am because I'm inferior to the other two. So because of his humility, the king elevated him, and because of the others' arrogance, he put them down. Regarding this, it says in the verse, Ki toiv omar lecha ale hena mihashpilcha lifnei nadiv. Better that they should tell you go up, basically, than they should tell you go down. Yeah. So if a person asserts himself too high, he's very likely to be put down. Somebody's going to say, hey, you stepped out of bounds. You're out of place. Down, back. So better to be unassuming and be promoted than to promote yourself and be demoted. When a person sees that the attribute of haughtiness and arrogance is overcoming him, he's got to think about thoughts which are going to startle his heart. For example, to contemplate, who am I to be arrogant? At the end of the day, I just come from a little drop. A putrid drop, no less. That was the beginning. What about the end? My end is going to be in the ground, devoured by worms. Therefore, he should be prepared to make accounting before God. How many people filled themselves with pride and arrogance, asserted their arrogant authority over others, and were passed from the world. And they were forgotten as if they never were. So what did it come to their aid? All of this arrogance and pride that they had. What was it all worth? And therefore, when a person finds himself feeling feelings of, oh, wow, yeah, I'm good. So you should be think about where you came from, and think about where you're going, and what you are now. A piece of flesh with a live sewer running right down the middle of you. You put in one end, you excrete from the other. That's what we are. So that's what you should be. Now, that doesn't mean to say that a person shouldn't have, what's the word? I mean, pride. Yes, pride, not proud, not being proud. Yeah, but pride over one's achievements. Wow. I've been able to daven every day this week, consistently, on time. Great. And I'm happy. I feel good about myself. I feel very good about that. It's a great accomplishment. But you should say thanks. Thanks, Hashem. Thank you, Hashem, for enabling and helping me do what I wanted to do, which was your will, to get up early and to get to davening on time and to daven properly and to do that all the time. And just like you've helped me until now, Hashem, I'm offering you a prayer that you should continue to help me. That's okay. Feel good about your accomplishments. Attribute them to God and admit your continued reliance on God for these things as well. So we're talking about when a person starts to feel himself with pride, not the recognition for the good things that he's done, but taking credit for those things, then he should put himself down. Put yourself in your place. One way that you can prevent yourself, a safeguard against gaiva and other such attributes is as follows. The person who wants to uproot entirely arrogance and pride from his heart, what should he do? He can't do this just with his thoughts alone. Initially, he's got to distance himself to the opposite end, the opposite spectrum. Even though, he said here that in avoiding gaiva, a person shouldn't put himself to the other extreme. Avoiding gaiva, for example, which would lead a person to have the wanton and indulgent pursuit of money or food or clothing or belongings and things like this, should not cause a person to go the opposite end and be a poor pauper roaming around the streets in a state of degradation. Not either. However, that's only long term. Short term, he says, it is justifiable and justified and correct if you want to uproot gaiva or any other attribute to temporarily take an extreme position in the opposite direction, to counterbalance what you're used to. And once you've been in this extreme and that extreme, then you'll find the proper balance in the middle. How so? For example, on the top of page Chaf Aleph, last paragraph of this section, this section of Gaiva, Ketzad, Odam shayarogil lilvosh begodim chashuvim, a person who is used to wearing very nice clothing, umetukonim, kimal bushe gase ruach, and very finely tailored, like the arrogant aristocracy, v'rotze l'shuv mizeh, im yilbash begodim toivim, yisaken osam b'mida benonis. If he just goes down from wearing royal clothing to nice clothing, so then he's going to attain just a middle-of-the-road solution to his arrogance. And he won't be able, therefore, to uproot arrogance from his heart. Or if he was accustomed to elevating himself, promoting himself through his intelligence or his other good deeds and his words and things like this, he can't perfect himself until he kind of acts in a way which is of great self-disparagement. Initially, he's got to put himself to the other extreme in order to counterbalance the extreme that he's been on until now, in order ultimately to gradually drift back to the middle ground. V'yeshev lamatim in a cold, he should intentionally sit lower than everybody else, or sit further away. Depending on the scenario and the setup, people are often seated by hierarchy. So if a person's used to promoting himself, and now he wants to work on humility, he should sit in a place which is considered to be humble, not an honor, to the sides or to the back. He should wear torn rags, which are embarrassment to those who wear them. It's pretty extreme. And similar in other such scenarios, until he uproots the hardiness in his heart. And similarly, a person who is very excitable and prone to anger. Initially, he should act in a way where if a person curses him or hits him or harms him in any way, he doesn't respond at all. And he should go in this opposite extreme for a great period of time until the source of pride has been uprooted from him. Then he'll be able to drift back to the middle path, which he promoted at the beginning of this, during the middle of this section, where he was saying, don't, in your fleeing from pride, take the opposite extreme either, take the middle ground. But it only means that you should strive to stabilize yourself in the middle ground. But in order to get to the middle ground from this extreme, you've actually got to push yourself in the other extreme to a certain extent. Then he should go back and return to the middle path. And then he should take this middle path for all of the days of his life. So in this pattern he should do after all of the bad attributes. Initially he should go to the opposite extreme, meaning that you could actually go no further. And act in this way for a long time. Then go back to taking the middle path. Because if you're going to try and correct yourself from a position of stinginess, you're not used to giving anything. So what are you going to do? Well, I'm just going to work through this slowly. So you just give a 10 agarot or a dime a few times a day. He said that's not the approach. If you're stingy, you've got the money. It's not that you can't afford it. You just don't want to part from it. So rather than not giving anything or giving the dime that you're used to giving, give $10. $10. As hard as that is, as difficult as it is for this person, he can afford it, of course. We're not talking about a case where he can afford it. He can afford it. As difficult as it is, he's got to do that in order to break that bad habit. And this is a remedy for all bad attributes. And a person whose heart inclines him to serve God in the best possible way in all areas, he should establish this path before him and before that of his friends. Namely, the idea of avoiding or overcoming negative things by going to the positive extreme and then gradually drifting back to the middle. So, but I think that going in the opposite direction would be commensurate to the degree which he's on. So let's say he's stingy. It doesn't mean to say that he should give everything he's got, because he's not entirely a miser. He might be giving. So he's 70% miserly. So now he should be a commensurate 70% generous and giving out monies and things to help other people in order to get to the middle ground. And regarding this, it says in the verse, V'sam derech ereinu b'yesh Elokim. If you place the path, I suppose what he means is if you place this strategy for attaining the middle ground, then ereinu b'yesh Elokim, you will see the salvation of God.